In a nutshell, the evidence in this video is just one piece of major corrupted evidence that convicted David Bain. I'm quoting from Joe Karam's book Trial by Ambush, because that is the book that gives me the transcripts, exact transcripts of evidence. In other words, what the defence and what the Crown said verbatim in court under oath. In a nutshell, what I'm saying here, just based on court transcripts, court evidence, is that Kim Jones, the New Zealand Crown so-called fingerprint expert or yes man, is guilty of perjury in my view and should be jailed for this. And if you listen carefully to the key points that I'm making, and that of course have already been made in court by the Karam team, I think you'll clearly see how Kim Jones's very first evidence was stretched and embellished to the max without perjuring himself, and then when he got into trouble he completely crossed the line and perjured himself. Kim Jones was the Crown's expert fingerprint witness in convicting David Bain in the first trial. Page 79, Trial by Ambush is where you'll find this. He told the court that for 7.5 years he had worked with the examination of exhibits and the identifications of persons by means of their fingerprints. This is one highly influential man, and his evidence is going to be given huge weight. He gave very specific evidence to the jury that convicted David Bain, saying that David Bain's fingerprints were put onto the rifle in what appeared to be blood, and that David Bain had left a palm print on the bathroom wall in what appeared to be blood. His evidence was described by the defence as an unspeakable mess, and this was agreed by the Court of Appeal, even though the Court of Appeal incredibly also said Kim Jones's corrupted evidence wouldn't have affected the first jury. Anyway, here are the reasons why Kim Jones's fingerprint evidence was described as an unspeakable mess and totally discredited. A question from defence to Kim Jones is really important because it shows that he was really scrutinised about what he was seeing, what he was saying, and how he was making his conclusions. New Zealand Crown so-called fingerprint expert or yes man Kim Jones was being questioned about whether he could be certain it was blood that he was saying was blood, but all he could say was that it appeared to be blood. Very poignantly, the defence then asked the following question: appears through your eyes because of the colour red, or because it reacts with the scientific test that tells you it's blood? To which Kim Jones answered, I am using the machine as an initial indicator. In other words, he was telling the jury and the judge that the rifle was covered in blood, that David Bain was transferring blood onto the rifle with his fingerprints, that David Bain had left a bloody palm print in the bathroom, and he was basing all of this on his proven misunderstanding that blood fluoresces under the polylight. So innocent prints that you would expect to be on David Bain's rifle and to be in the bathroom were now being presented to the first court and jury in a very calculated and specific way that convicted David Bain. And all of this by a guy that couldn't even see the colour red in any of the substance that he was calling blood, and that couldn't even interpret a polylight. After it was exposed by a UK fingerprint expert employed by the defence that New Zealand Crown so-called fingerprint expert or yes man Kim Jones had completely misinterpreted and misunderstood how to use the polylight to detect blood, He then went on to say, to try and cover himself, and this is in one of the latter trials, Kim Jones then went on to say, in court, this direct quote from Kim Jones is on page 287 of Trial by Ambush by Joe Karam. When I first examined the rifle on the 21st of June 1994, I was alerted to the fact that they were prints in blood by the mere fact that they were red in colour, the red pigment, and that alerted me to the fact, as I say, they were bloody fingerprints. And these are the direct words of Kim Jones in court. Yet, in the first trial, New Zealand Crown so-called fingerprint expert or yes man Kim Jones tells the court, the judge and the jury in very calculated language that David Bain's fingerprints on his own rifle were made in a substance that looked like blood, but that he could see no red colour there, and that there was a palm print of David Bain's in the bathroom that looked like blood, but he could see no red colour there. So already he was making a misleading statement that the fingerprints on the rifle looked like blood and that the palm print on the bathroom looked like blood, whereas in fact they didn't actually look like blood at all, and the only reason that he described them as looking like blood was simply because of his misunderstanding of how to read the polylight. But even there he was covering himself from perjury and professional embarrassment by saying only that it looked like blood and not saying that it was blood. So he had clearly thought out his evidence and the possible ramifications of his evidence well before that first trial, and given very calculated evidence to cover himself against both professional incompetence and perjury on that first trial. Yet, when he gets into trouble further down the track and his evidence is totally exposed, he then goes on to say, when I first examined the rifle on the 21st of June 1994, I was alerted to the fact that they were prints in blood by the mere fact that they were red in colour, the red pigment, and that alerted me to the fact, as I say, they were bloody fingerprints. So now he's taking his own clever, calculated, embellished evidence and presenting it as fact, and he's doing this in a court of law. And now I put it to you that he has crossed the line of perjury. He has gone from presenting exaggerated, embellished evidence that was very calculated to start with, and crossed the line now and perjured himself. And when a person can do this with such huge consequences to another, for instance David Bain spending 13 years in jail, you have to ask whether corruption of evidence, deliberate corruption of evidence from Crown or defence lawyers should be punishable by jail sentence. Just clarifying again, when we go back to his very first evidence, and where he knows he was thoroughly examined on this first evidence, and I'll directly quote from page 80 and 81 on Trial by Ambush here, he would never say in that first trial that he saw any red colour in those fingerprints on the rifle or the palm print on the bathroom that he was describing as being made in a substance that looked like blood. And this was because he was already testing the water with a highly embellished and factually incorrect statement to get a gauge of what the court's response would be. Court misleaders and court liars know that you only mislead and lie to the court to the extent that is needed to achieve your ends. Then if you fail there and your reputation and your liberty are at risk, you go all out, but you initially only mislead and lie to a small extent and test the water.